And while the situation in Afghanistan rapidly deteriorates, here in Germany, questions are being asked about Berlin's responsibility to protect the people left behind when its troops pulled out. Calls are growing for Germany to rapidly evacuate local support staff who help the armed forces in their mission. The Taliban view them as traitors, and many people who worked for foreign forces have already been killed in the onslaught. Well, now Germany's Foreign Minister Heiko Mass announced plans to relax visa requirements for support staff to bring them to safety quickly.
We have chartered planes to repatriate German embassy employees. These flights will also be available to our local support staff who are still in Afghanistan. The embassy in Kabul will remain operational, but we have decided that the local aides who have not yet received a visa will be able to request them in Germany. That will considerably expedite their departure from Afghanistan.
Germany's foreign minister speaking moments ago, and NATO has just concluded an urgent meeting discussing the worsening situation in Afghanistan. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg led discussions with envoys from the 30 members of the Transatlantic Alliance. Well, we think that it focused on the evacuation of foreign nationals from the country. A number of nations, including the U.S., have already begun pulling out their citizens. Let's get you the very latest now. DW correspondent Bernd Riegert is in Brussels. Bernd, okay, we understand the meeting has ended. What can you tell us?
Well, after this extraordinary meeting, Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, issued a short statement saying that NATO is very concerned about the developments in Afghanistan and that NATO also wants to maintain its support for the government. And they also addressed the Taliban, saying that they will not be recognized as a legal government if they take over the rest of the country. All the ambassadors were a little bit surprised about the pace that the Taliban are taking. And there was also criticism. The United Kingdom said it was a mistake to withdraw so quickly without troops on the ground. Now there's a real problem in Kabul and Afghanistan.
Now, we understand also that in the last couple of hours, foreign embassies in Kabul are suspending operations. Is NATO keeping a diplomatic presence in Kabul?
Yeah, Denmark and Norway declared that they will shut down the embassies. Germany and others will cut operations down to a minimal presence. NATO is also keeping a very low number of diplomats and staff there, but they wouldn't tell how many because of security reasons. They don't want to tell the Taliban what they're actually doing. But everybody is now preparing for the worst case scenario, and that is evacuating all personnel.
Remind us, Bernd, is NATO providing support to the Afghan security forces at the moment?
Yeah, that's what they are claiming. There are some advisors left, but there are no combat troops anymore, no boots on the ground. And the US is sending 3,000 additional soldiers to Kabul, but not to support the fights, but just to maintain the withdrawal of diplomats and other personnel from Afghanistan back to the United States. And also Britain is sending 600 troops, but also not to fight. So the support actually is diminishing, and the question is also what happens to the United Nations agencies and NGOs and other personnel that is there that also has to be withdrawn and to be secured and to be pulled out in the future.
DW's Bernd Riegert reporting from Brussels. Thank you. I'd like to welcome now Paul Miller, who served in Afghanistan and was the country director on the National Security Council under both U.S. Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Sir, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to DW News. As someone who served in Afghanistan, how does it feel to watch the Taliban run riot?
Well, it's heartbreaking to see what's happening in Afghanistan right now. For me, and I think for anybody who has spent time working on the intervention there, trying to make life better for the Afghans and trying to keep the United States and our allies safe from international terrorism. It's a deeply concerning situation, and it certainly does not feel good to watch this happen.
Is it getting harder to see a path of victory for government forces, or is there still a way to push back the Taliban?
I'm afraid the way to push back the Taliban would be to reintroduce international military forces to give the Afghan forces the support they need, whether that's air support, medevac, logistics, intelligence, command and control, the kinds of things we have been giving to the Afghans for the last 10 years or more is what would be needed to push back the Taliban right now. I'm not sure there's political will for that in Washington, D.C. or other capitals, but that's what it would take to stop the Taliban's advance.
Well, as we're having this conversation, NATO is holding crisis talks in Brussels, looking at the events of this past week. What are their options? Could we potentially see a course correction?
It's hard to answer that question. There's a military component to it and a political component. Militarily, can we? I think that the United States and our allies, we have the resources. There are troops, still a few on the ground in Afghanistan, and there's troops in the region and forward deployed. So could it happen? Materially, I think the answer is yes. The real question is politically. Is there any appetite to re-intervene in Afghanistan? I hear you say that NATO is meeting right now. My understanding is that within the Biden administration, there's really no appetite to relitigate this decision. President Biden has emphasized several times in recent weeks that he's comfortable with this decision. He feels no regrets about it. And he said he feels no responsibility for what's happening in Afghanistan right now.
That is so striking, Mr. Miller, because I'm so happy that you brought that up, because President Joe Biden is currently facing some very tough criticism for his decision to follow through with the pullout from some very high-level generals who've spoken out publicly. But it is falling on deaf ears. Are you surprised by that?
I am surprised. I thought that President Biden had a window of opportunity in this first half year of his term to repudiate the peace deal that President Trump had signed, because everybody knew the peace deal was flawed and that the Taliban were not abiding by it. President Biden had every opportunity to reevaluate the situation and come up with his own policy and maybe start negotiations afresh from a different posture, a posture of strength against the Taliban. So I'm very surprised at the decision he's made and the fact that he's sticking with it day after day as we see the situation deteriorate.
In a frankly surreal development, the U.S. is reportedly pleading with the Taliban not to attack its embassy should Kabul fall or should they overtake Kabul. What message does that send to the Afghans?
The message it sends to the Afghans is that the United States, that some of the spokesmen for the American government are indulging in some wishful thinking, and they're gearing their public messaging towards the Taliban audience, not to the Afghan audience, the American audience, or the international audience. Some of the American spokesmen still believe there could be a negotiated solution that the Taliban would actually adhere to. I think that's a fantasy. I think we all know that's not realistic. And yet it seems that some in the U.S. State Department still believe that it's worth not burning bridges with the Taliban. I think the Taliban burned that bridge a long time ago.
What's your biggest fear?
My biggest fear is unfolding right now. My biggest fear is the Taliban militarily taking over the country, and we return the clock to 1996. It will be awful for the Afghans. It will also introduce a much higher risk of international terrorism for the international community, for the United States and our allies. Al-Qaeda and its copycats will find safe haven again in Afghanistan and Pakistan. We had successfully kept them more concerned with their survival over the past 20 years than with planning new attacks. And there have been no major international terrorist attacks emanating from that region for 20 years. My biggest fear is we've undone that progress. They will find safe haven, and they will now be able to use that safe haven to plan, recruit, train, and fundraise. And we're watching this happen in real time.
Paul D. Miller, Afghanistan Director at the National Security Council under Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you.
I'd like to take you now to Kabul. I'd like to welcome Mariam Atahi. She's an activist for women's and children's rights. Thank you so much for your time, Mariam. How are things in Kabul right now?
Thank you so much. Right now where I am, the situation is dire. The Taliban is very close to Kabul. They took the control of Logar province, which is very close to Kabul. And the situation is there. People are stressing out, especially women. And there you could see, that you could watch on your reports how people are suffering, especially the displacement people who were displaced from the north provinces and also from the south provinces. People are in a very very bad humanitarian situations, and people is stressing out that maybe overnight or tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, Taliban will take the Kabul, and we are going back to the 1996, and with the same fate, with the same situation that Afghan women, especially, who have gone through so much during the Taliban regime, and they are scaring, and everybody is scared what will happen. I mean, the situation is very worse right now, and everybody is scaring. I mean, nobody can focus. We don't know what will happen tomorrow.
Mariam, what are your fellow women activists and friends telling you in the areas that have been overtaken by the Taliban? What have their experiences been right now?
Yeah, I'm also a co-founder of Women Feminine Perspective campaign, where we are gathering and also collecting stories from the rural area and women who are living in the rural area. So we have been collecting the stories from women who are living under Taliban control. They are actually saying, and they are sending their narratives that the situation is not good. There is a lot of war. Women are not allowed to go to school, and they are also kind of like kind of restrictions that they have placed in the area, and they are actually telling the story that that's why most of the very young girls and women who have been displaced and came to Kabul and living in parks and living on the streets, they are telling us the situation is very worse, and they can't go to school. They are not going out, and they have been being asked to wear hijab and burqa.
Mariam, in conclusion, what is your biggest fear? I mean, Kabul is now an island basically on its own. What do you fear most?
Well, of course, it's a big fear for all of Afghan women who especially work and left their life to change the Afghan women's situations, and also made a lot of efforts to bring change on women's lives, and also to have access to their fundamental rights, at least going to school, at least going to the work and get out of their home. Bears big fears for me and for my fellow, for other women who are living in Kabul and also in the provinces that already taken by the Taliban, is that if they come and ask me to sit at home and not going to get out, and also at the same time, I'm also feared that if they come and also killed me, because for the past 20 years I advocate for women's rights, which was against their ideology, against for their politics. I also have the fear, and also my other girls or the other women that I have known them, they have fear and they're scared that if the Taliban comes and they check home by home and asking us to give and to be accountable for what we have done during the past 14 years, which was against their ideology and thoughts. These are the fears that we are really, really afraid. We are really stressing out that if Taliban is coming tomorrow, what will happen to Afghan women.
Mariam Atahi, activist for women's and children's rights in Afghanistan. We wish you all the very best.
Thank you.